let's talk about ancestors and ancestor veneration. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. Today I want to attempt to film a video that I have wanted to film for many years. It's about ancestors and how to begin curating a practice with your ancestors, and I would love for this video to be something that's so accessible and something that everyone can sort of pick up, and it can be a kind of 101. But I think because of the nature of the topic, the subject, and also because of how subjective it is depending upon the practitioner and depending upon their cultural background and upbringing and origins and trauma and everything, like the context, I think that it's actually something that's going to have to be a lot more delicate than that. And I don't think that there's going to be necessarily like a one size fits all. I mean, there's definitely not a one size fits all approach to this topic. You know, practicing, I feel that working with ancestors is something that really deepened for me after I lost close members of my family, and that didn't happen until I was slightly older. I was about 15, I think, when I first lost a grandparent, and there was one grandparent that I never met, so that growing up was definitely something that was in my awareness. But I think that, I guess, the wisdom of age brings clarity and understanding of, you know, adulthood and all of these things, all of these factors. You know, certainly colonialist settler kind of history, really problematic sort of ancestral lineages that we come to learn about as we grow can really help to inform. And in many ways I feel like this topic, not only is it really delicate and really subjective and really specific for each individual, I think also it's sort of in my head kind of dichotomous, because I feel that in many ways working with your ancestors is such a beautiful doorway to beginning working with spirits, and it's something that I feel that I would offer that to newer witches or people who are starting to work with spirits for the first time, but at the same time, because of all of the contextual complexities that are inherent and that are then also implied and that then come along with it. My words aren't great. I think because of all of that, the layers of complexity and personal context, it makes it also contrastingly actually very difficult, very complicated, very personal and complex to begin. And so I think you almost do need to have been practicing for a while and to certainly have, you know, explored the topic of the shadow from the perspective of Carl Jung's shadow, and then unpacking elements of your shadow. And that's again another video that I've wanted to do for a really long time, and not because of the complexities around it and how the words are thrown around so much in our communities. And I think with everything there's layers of complexity, and certainly in practicing magical arts, in the occult, in the esoteric worlds, in spirituality, it is a very complex, nuanced, subjective area. So I'm going to try clumsily to paint a picture for you if you are just coming to understand that, you know, as a witch, magical practitioner, you can work with your ancestors in a way that goes beyond just what we understand of, you know, working, say, with Ancestry.com or 23andMe or whatever it may be, any kind of DNA kind of program that we might plug our details into and then, you know, access. You know, how we might work with beloved dead ancestors beyond looking through photos, looking at memories and things like that, which is definitely a really, really important part, but just like where we might begin in our searching, in our quest. And so I think like understanding the concept within Western esotericism of what ancestors really mean is a really good place to start, and I think it's something that is discussed widely and probably understood quite widely as well. Within many spiritual traditions and amongst many pagans, witches, occultists, there is a belief that ancestors may not simply be your blood, you know, that they can be something more than that, and there can be ancestors of the land, so the land that you are living on, and also your country of origin, your home, that these spirits, these ancestral spirits, they transcend simply blood. And so it can also work then if you have an adopted family, or if you lived with grandparents, or if you lived with step family or step parents, or if you lived with a friend's family, for instance, or if you know, have a mixture of those things. And then so it sort of transcends blood and can be so much more than simply your bloodline. So often you'll see guidance broken up into things like blood ancestors, bloodline, specifically from your direct lineage, so from your parents to your mother line and your father line, maternal, paternal. And these can often be the thing we first think of. So they will be part of your DNA line and what you will see if you do go through one of those DNA programs. Then there's more like friends, chosen allies, adopted parents, or family relations that are not tied to your blood. So for me, I have some beloved dead who I refer to, who I do think of as bloodline ancestors, but they're not actually my bloodline, but I work with them in just the same way that I would work to my bloodline. But these would be chosen ancestors that are part of my family, but they're not actually, they don't actually have my blood. They're part of my family through a marriage. These are generally people who love you, who care for you, who have that inherent investment in your life, who want to support you with your healing, with your growth, and have done so in life as well as within death. You know, oftentimes I feel like these people are very significant in somebody's life because they have that level of importance there, and there's love there, you know, and I think very much that, you know, a partner can be that for you. As I mentioned, then there's land spirits, land ancestors who are directly on the land that you are living now, as well as ancestral spirits of the land of your origin, so of your birth if you live somewhere different now, and you can work with these in a similar way, other than if you're obviously not there, it would be slightly different. You can't necessarily go to a place in nature and connect to the land spirits as if you were there. There would be different practical ways that you would then work with the spirits of those locales. Connected to that as well, I think people of the land, people who came before us, people who worked the land, people who understood the land, and often thinking of like herbalists or people who worked the land, grew food, tended crops, and these are very much cultural as well. The way I speak about my beloved dead, they are direct ancestors, mostly through blood, but then as I said, I have that crossover where I do think of them as blood, but actually they would be chosen familial kind of ancestors. Like that, you then would also have ancestors that are not, and who you may never have known, but they are ancestors who are perhaps a name and community of yours, or perhaps they are spiritual ancestors, or they're people who stood for something that you very much believe in. There were significant people in history, significant people in your particular tradition or lineage, not necessarily bloodline, but people who taught the same practices that perhaps you were raised with, maybe people who are in the public eye, and these are also very cultural figures. So many people may connect with these spiritual ancestors. And also then people who you've looked up to their work, so artists and poets, writers, those kinds of people who have shaped you in your life, and maybe singer-songwriters, those sorts of people who continue to inspire you through their work and their music or their poetry or whatever it is, their art. Those people are sort of more honorary kind of ancestral figures, but who are very important nonetheless because they shape who we are and how we see the world. I think it's helpful to talk about why someone might want to connect to ancestors, because I think when talking about some of these things with people who aren't necessarily witchy or, you know, interested in the occult or spirituality, there have been questions around, like, why would you even want to go there? Like, why do you want to talk about death? And I think that there is a sort of great resistance to talking about death, and I think that, you know, being able to, beyond the more sort of typical obvious things that I will mention, reasons why you might want to reach out to ancestors and connect with them and have a reciprocal relationship. Beyond those reasons, I think that being able to talk about death and being more comfortable with death, being able to understand death and think about it from a perspective of how you feel about it, how you're relating to it, you know, and unpacking fears and things around it, can be a really healthy thing for a human in general to do, because there is such a kind of fear around it. People don't want to speak about death. So from that perspective, I think it's a healthy thing, and I think that kind of, it sort of goes in alignment with shadow work. And I think definitely working with ancestors, it does take you down these roads, especially for someone like me as a white person. I have ancestral ties to South Africa. My family were of Dutch origin, and in the 1600s were part of the Dutch colonialist settlers in South Africa, and that was some of the most brutal slave trade, and that is part of me and who I am. And so deconstructing, decolonizing, and trying to understand, while still grappling with, because I don't have a full picture yet, it's something that I'm still trying to get a full picture of what that looks like and who these individuals were, because there's still a lot that's unknown in that. But knowing that already, I know that I have work to do to decolonize, and it's an unfolding practice that's a very personal practice. But that then leads me to, I think, the main point, which is healing, ancestral healing and healing trauma within the bloodline. I understood this from quite an early age. I don't know why, but the understanding that from your maternal line anyway, you have the eggs within your body for your future maternal line, and then your maternal ancestors had your egg in them. So I was an egg inside my mum, and my daughter was an egg inside me, inside my mum. She was inside her mum, who was inside her mum, who was inside her mum. And so that's a very powerful lineage to track, but then it's also completely different to my mum's father's line, and then as well completely different to my paternal mother's side and my paternal father's side. My paternal father I never met. There's just so many directions you can go. It's very, very complicated and very, very personal. There have also been scientific studies to show the kinds of ways that trauma can be passed down through the bloodlines. There was a specific trauma study that I learned about recently where they tested on mice, I think, about traumatizing one generation, and then, I mean, it's really not very nice. The subsequent generations were also traumatized, and they had to create a sort of therapeutic setting where small amounts of the scent that was linked to the trauma was introduced, whilst also these mice were being petted and loved and treated nicely. And so it was kind of like reverse psychology, I guess, but then that healed the generational line, and so subsequent generations were not traumatized in the same way when they had that particular scent. I think we all experience trauma in one or many ways in our lives, and to varying degrees. And I think that learning how to practice shadow work, learning how to, you know, heal these traumas for ourselves is a really powerful thing, but also understanding what traumas were for our previous generations. So you might be able to speak with loved ones and find out what traumas were in their lives, what particular events may have occurred. And that can be a really, really powerful thing to be able to do for yourself and for future bloodlines. Also then just receiving guidance and a kind of practical solutions to problems that you have. You know, I feel like some of the things that I'm faced with on a day-to-day basis are things that some of my beloved dead, my loved ones, have also faced. And so speaking with them, communing with them in prayer, in devotional space, in ritual space, being able to connect with them, and then going to the dream space, meet them, or going into a journey and then meeting them there. It can be such a powerful way to receive guidance and downloads, and a lot of that happens for me with my ancestors in the dream space and in astral space. A lot of messages have come through over the past few years from my ancestors. As life becomes more and more complicated for me, they seem to have more and more advice for me and guidance, and it's incredibly peaceful. It helps you to feel so connected and loved. It really helps with other loved ones as well. I feel like I get a heads up. I'm getting guidance from beloved dead about people who are still alive now and when they may or may not need support and things that are going on. It can also really help, I think, to understand, as I said before, what your bloodline is, so that again you can understand more about your place in the world and how things historically have come to pass the way they are. And especially as a white person who does have that colonial ancestry, it's important for me. I think nothing can ever make that right or okay, but understanding it and making reparations by way of working with ancestors, understanding it, putting words to it, healing through action and reparation and communing with ancestors about it can just provide a lot of peace and clarity, and hopefully as well, like, then going forward these things won't continue, or it provides more and more awareness for future generations. And that's definitely what I would want my children to understand. I think the work also, because it's so natural to connect to loved ones who are either in your bloodline or who have helped to raise you, people you connected with, you know, those chosen ancestors, because they're already there with you. This is one of the reasons why I feel like it's a really nice place to start if you're a witch or a magical practitioner and you're wanting to start working with spirits, because you've already got that tie there. There's already that bloodline, or there's already that intimate connection, that intimate bond. And really, you know, a glass of water, a tea light, an image, or an item they had, like a piece of jewelry that you've been gifted, whatever it is, and you can have that connection there. I do have a place for my lost animals, my beloved pets who have passed on to the other side. I have a place for them in my altar space as well. One of the reasons I wanted to discuss this today is because as we approach Samhain, I really want to relocate my ancestral altar space, which is currently in the room that I'm in. I want to relocate it to a location downstairs where I'm going to be around it more. I want it to be present in my life more. I would like to connect to my beloved dead ancestors on a more regular basis than I am currently, and to be offering them more libations and just to be meeting in, checking in with them. I think not only for myself but for them as well. I feel them often calling out to me, and I think, you know, during this time it's so typical to hear about the thinning of the veil, and at Beltane as well on that other side of the wheel of the year. But I think that it is very much more of a, like, there's a zeitgeist there. It's almost like, you know, there's the egregore, there's the spirit of the idea of connecting in for everyone at this time of year, because everyone thinks, oh, Halloween, the ghosts and ghouls come out, and this is when spirits and ghosts are around, this is when Ouija happens and all that stuff. And I think that's probably why, because in the collective kind of consciousness and the zeitgeist, it's there. But in reality, I think that the veil is always thin, for want of a better word, for people who are connecting in often and who are exercising those gifts that they innately have. And I'm not saying that some people have gifts and other people don't, because I think that pretty much everyone has some level of psychic awareness, psychic ability, but it's just about honing the skills and tapping into it. And I think that you can switch it off quite easily, especially if you get disillusioned as a child or as an adolescent. I think it's really, really easy. Now, I got scared when I was quite young, and I very much remember saying out loud a number of times to myself, to friends, to family, and then on my own to my guides and my spirits and to God. When I spoke to God, I would say, I do not want to see ghosts. I do not want to see ghosts. I do not want to see ghosts. And so I very rarely see physical apparitions of spirits. I have seen physical apparitions, but it is rare, and they are not ghosts. They're not that kind of entity. They're other kinds of spirits, entities, rather than spirits who used to be human. So I kind of put a kibosh on that, I think, when I was really young. But I would instead feel, know, smell, and hear. I do see things, and the way that I do see things mostly happens to be in my third eye. So when I close my eyes, when I'm in astral space, when I'm in meditation, that's when I tend to see things. But in terms of physical apparitions, it's only been a handful of times that I've actually seen a physical apparition of something, and it's never been someone who has been a physical human being in this incarnation. And I think that's interesting, because I do feel that as someone who works quite a lot with ancestors, I feel like I have always connected in with spirits of the land, coming to understanding of what pantheism was and then animism. When I was younger, like, I did connect into land quite a lot, and I felt things very, very keenly. I'm a Scorpio rising. I have a lot of planets in Cancer. I am very deeply intuitive, and I have psychic hits often. And so I feel that it's quite a clear manifestation of my choices when I was very young that I was too scared to see physical apparitions of a human ghost in front of me. I don't know if that will ever change. I don't know, because I mean, there's always more work I can do. There's always more deepening into, and I certainly have a lot of stresses on me that would impact me and impede me. And I do, you know, I have a lot of things, a lot of lifestyle factors like chronic illnesses, a daughter with ASD, you know, stresses and stuff. Like, I've got a lot of life things that are going on for me that put stress on, that then inhibit those abilities. And I think that it's an interesting thing, and definitely a side tangent. Let's talk about important elements for creating or curating a relationship with an ancestral spirit, an ancestor, beloved dead. And I will say, first of all, that the ancestors that I work with primarily are beloved dead. So they're all people I have known who have then passed. I have connected in to spirits of ancestors via journey work and dream work. They are faceless and nameless. I have feelings of these people. That is the extent of my work with unknown dead. So the known dead to me are my beloved dead, and they are my primary connection. So if you were to ask me detailed questions about working with unknown dead, that is an area I know less about, other than in theory. And in the small amount of connection that I have had with these people, I can't even say their names because I don't know them, and I can only go on a feeling. And I've seen them in dreams and they are silhouetted beings, silhouetted humans. And I feel their love. I feel their love for me. I've seen them as well in many ways and in many instances. So I've seen them around fires for me, seen them stood in a line, I've felt them holding me. I know what they feel like. They just don't have a name, and beyond the recognition and beyond the work that I've done with them so far, which is not a lot for healing work or anything, the work that I focus on mostly is my beloved dead, my known ancestors. And most of them are bloodline, some of them are not. So for me, the first thing is reciprocity and respect, really. Like, these are the things that are just number one when you're working with any kind of spirits, plant spirits, animal spirits, land spirits. It is not you calling something up because you want something and you just asking. It's not a vending machine. It's not that at all. It's very much cultivating a relationship just to have the relationship, really, and to foster a connection between the two of you. But if one of you doesn't want that connection, it's probably not going to go very far. So boundaries are really, really key. Not every ancestor, not every person who has passed is going to be well or in a headspace or in a respectful place to work with you. You know, it can be that some people who in life did abhorrent things can heal and can become a kind of well ancestor, but I would probably err on the side of if they were not a well human when they were on the earth, as in if they did morally reprehensible things, there's a good likelihood that they are not in a place to support and care for and uplift and guide you in death. You're not necessarily going to know. So I know from the feelings that I've had, the ancestors I've connected with, and I'm fairly certain that there are a number of ancestors who are not well, who are not for me to connect with, who have not shown themselves, and I've not expressed that I would want to meet with those ancestors. In fact, quite on the contrary, and this is something that you'll read and hear others speaking about, that it's very wise when approaching this to begin with asking to connect to ancestors who are well in spirit and who have your highest and greatest good in mind. And these are the people. So welcoming in healed, benefic, well ancestors of blood and of spirit, of place, of culture, who wish to bring guidance and support to you and who wish to have that connection with you. And then, you know, cultivating a relationship from there based on that reciprocity. Now, things like offerings are common practice, and I think things that are really, really good. Again, it just has to be very simple. Water is the go-to, and for me, I'm going to do a video about this because I feel that water is such a powerful conduit for spirit connection and psychic work, psychic messages. And so I would just say water, water every time. And even if you do offer other libations like coffee or tea or liquor, I would also offer water because I feel water is a conduit. I also think something that they had in life that they loved and enjoyed and perhaps passed down to you, or something that is similar to what they had as a gift, can be lovely. Things like flowers, perfume, you know, makeup, jewelry, these kinds of things, treasured heirlooms and items can be really, really powerful. I have little pots and things that belonged to my grandmother. I have a prayer book as well and things like that, and things I'm looking at. I even have a cocktail shaker on my ancestral altar at the moment because it belonged to my maternal father. And so just little things like that. In terms of offerings, you can also offer time and energy. I think something like donating to a charitable cause that was connected directly to your beloved dead as they were passing or in life, so something that they worked towards, or for instance making a donation to a charity who supported them towards the end, that kind of thing can be a really, really lovely way to show your appreciation. Energy as in reading to them, saying prayers, poetry, singing. You know, things can be very personal, even things like dance. My mother's father was a great artist, and so talking about particular artists and things like that is something that I remember doing with him a lot. Just little things about the family that you grew up with and that you knew, that those people, those beloved dead, just little memories that you can bring. I think, again, this is where it gets so personal. I think also in many traditions, people say that when you make offerings such as like food, like full plates or cake, or then you should not consume. But I often think this is, again, very, very personal and subjective, because I feel that there are certain people who I would have broken bread with, say it in that way, but I had shared many meals with and would cook with and things like that. And I think that part of that relationship was actually consuming. And so maybe if it's not that you consume what you've put on the altar, it's that you maybe have the same. So you have a piece of cake and they have a piece of cake, or you offer them a sweet and you also, like a humbug, for instance, you offer a humbug, you also partake in a humbug. And many people do this with coffee or tea, things like that, that you can share actually like you used to. One thing I did when one family member passed away, who I felt very close to, was I had a glass of wine and I poured them a glass of wine and I put it next to their photo and I drank a glass of wine with them after they passed, because that was a profound connection for me when I was an adult. Anyway, they knew me when I was a child, so, but when I was an adult, you know, I would enjoy a glass of wine with this person and chat with this person, and they were so important to me, and I could feel that was just something I needed to do. And oftentimes these rituals are so very simple, but they're so very personal, and they will come as your connection builds. But the boundaries are really key, and they come first. So not wanting to work with particular ancestors, if there is a particular problematic ancestor who you feel has reached out, but you don't want to work with them, it's not your responsibility to heal everybody. If you don't feel, it's the same if a deity were to reach out to you and you don't feel ready to work with them, you are in no obligation to work with anyone or do anything. This is your practice. And so just being respectful and honest about your feelings and saying, at this time I don't feel that I can, thank you for reaching out, and ending the connection there. And I think that is a really healthy thing to be able to do, to discern. I also think that it's important to be very critical about the kinds of things that you're receiving in terms of messages, and if you're receiving any direct instructions that seem like they are not in your best interest, and things like that can be subtle. I think that potentially, especially during high energy times, there can be spirits that latch on, there can be malevolent trickster spirits that latch on and that do take energy, they do try to sort of suck energy, so they may be presenting as someone who you knew. And really I think if they are vague, or they're not particularly answering questions the way that you would imagine them to, or if they're presenting some different kinds of ideas that you don't think they would have, or if they're asking you to do something very specific that is not for your highest and greatest good, really, I think that it's quite obvious that that's not your loved one. You know, unless it's one of those people that you're connecting with who was not a known ancestor, who is potentially a problematic ancestor, which I would probably advise don't do. You know, I'm sure there are some people out there who would say, yeah, it's fine as long as you follow this step and this step, you've got protections up and this, that and the other. But I just think, you know, this is your practice. You want to feel safe and secure, and you want it to be for your highest and greatest good, and obviously healing for yourself, healing for your future generations, and healing for your ancestors. But if something's making you feel uncomfortable, I just don't think that it's worth it. I don't think. But that is down to you to judge, and that's where discernment comes in. That's where being able to think critically and being able to look at things without, you know, being so attached to the emotional outcome, or necessarily attached to, like, this is that person. I mean, generally you will feel guidance, a sense of calm, a sense of hope. You know, I have had some negative experiences from what I thought at the time was an ancestral spirit, and what I think actually was happening was a reverberation of some of their own traumas onto me, and unraveling that was a complex situation. And what led me to understand it the way I understand it now was through dream analysis, through looking at the appearances within the dream and contrasting them with appearances of healthy beloved dead. And that is how I got to that. And the contact is now a lot healthier with that particular spirit, because I wasn't necessarily having that intense attachment to the contact, because at the time the contact felt so important that even though it had negative connotations and a negative impact on me at the time, because it was that contact, I held to it. So I can tell you with my own understanding and knowledge that discernment is really, really key, and being critical and definitely having somewhat of a distance between yourself and what you're doing. And I know that that almost sounds counterintuitive because of the topic, because of what we're dealing with, but it's just a wise precaution to take. And I'm not going to go on about protections, but there are a number of protections that you can do. For me, as someone who works, as I said, with beloved dead ancestors in the dream time space, in astral space, in journey work, those are areas that need protection. I have physical items and plant ally protective amulets. I also then have energetic shields and wards on me, my space, and when I go into liminal spaces, that is there. And I think that that is a really crucial element. So if you are really new to this, I would definitely go and check out some protection magic if you are new to this. And I would advise that you understand protection magic in as much detail as you possibly can before you embark on this kind of thing. So I think something that you'll probably see a lot is ancestral altars on social media now. I don't share my ancestral altar. This is a personal choice out of respect for my beloved dead and out of respect for other family members and loved ones remaining in this incarnation on the earth right now. I just don't feel comfortable. It's something I won't be doing. It is currently in that direction and I will be taking it downstairs, and I'm looking forward to that. It feels meaningful for me at this time, but I can definitely give you some examples of how you can set up your space. So you can look behind me. This is an altar space for this work right here. This is pretty much a catch-all altar space for my work on YouTube as a witch that contains grounding elements and aspects of ritual that I would bring to a practice. It hasn't changed a lot in the last few years, so it's not like other altars that I work on because I don't tend to actually work here other than this work that I'm doing right now. So this is what this altar is for. There's actually not any water here now, apart from there's some water here that I'm currently drinking. You can do that really annoying tapping thing. It's got this amazing evil eye. I love it. This has some items for the season. It's beautiful scully here. I have some foraged plants. I have a drum, a lunar calendar. This is a candlestick made by my dad, and this is usually on the ancestral altar. I brought this as an element. I have a prosperity bowl here, and I have some other artwork, a little fairy door, and some personal objects in the corner. I have a little jewelry box with teeth from my kids. So there are some personal objects, but it's generally a mishmash of space because there's books underneath as well. There's energies around, and that's a kind of altar space in itself. It's not really an altar to anything specific apart from this as a representation of me and what I do here. So this is really an altar in representation of what I do here with some personal elements. Any altar, if it's going to be a devotional space, really needs to include something connecting to the person. So a photo or a depiction of this person, an item of theirs, and a glass of water and a candle, and that can be it. And then if you have multiple people, you may wish to put them on the same altar space, and potentially some people have different altar spaces for different people or different types of ancestors. So again, it's a very personal process. You know, you may set up an altar once a year during this time, or you may have something that goes all year round, which is basically my experience for a long time. Of course, with every altar, you want the space to be clean, you want it to be cleansed, you want to protect the space, and you want to include anything that connects to the person. So memories, photographs, as I said, items, and then you can make offerings as we spoke about before. So it's important to use the space that you have, and that's one of the reasons why I'm moving this space, because I feel like it's not used as much as I could if it was in a place that I frequent more often. And so that's why I want to move it. Connecting in on a regular basis, a semi-regular basis, whatever that might be for you and the ancestors that you're working with. So again, that's really, really personal, but having little rituals that you do, sort of like having a cup of coffee, or like I spoke about, like you're sharing space, sharing a meal together, and that's obviously a very popular tradition at Samhain to prepare a dumb supper, a feast for your ancestors to enjoy. Serving them and having space for them at the table during Samhain can be a really, really powerful ritual as well. Connecting in with your ancestors, again, is a really complicated thing. We could talk for ages because you can use tarot, you can use pendulums, scrying, you can use all kinds of forms of divination. You can connect in and work with the dream time space that I've talked about, going into journey, meditation work, astral work, etc. All of these things you can do, and it just is about what works for you, what happens to be the best kind of connection for you and that person, that ancestor. And it may vary from ancestor to ancestor, it may vary over time, and so just allow it to be fluid. Don't put too much pressure on it to look a certain way just because somebody else's practice looks that way. So if you don't use cards so often, but you use dream work like me, you know, don't put pressure on yourself to necessarily connect through cards. But a lot of people do have a set of cards, oracle cards or tarot cards, that they associate with a particular person, or that they associate with connecting with their ancestors. And so that can be really powerful and profound as well if that is your experience. One really beautiful technique that I'm leaning into a lot more is artwork. So I do incorporate art as part of my spiritual practice, and I always have. I've created magic by painting, drawing, and that is something that I've always done since I was young. My mum was an art teacher and art was in my blood, so my granddad was an art teacher at a university, and so it's something that is definitely through my bloodline. And so being able to draw memories or depict certain ancestral dreams I've had is a really, really powerful way to connect in as well. And just the process of that connecting in with the artwork can be a really, really profound way to connect to your ancestor spirits as well and to honor them. So again, like, it doesn't have to look like everyone else's. It can be really, really personal to you. I think the shadow work is an important piece as well, especially if you are decolonizing your ancestry. So working, if you have it available to you to go through one of the DNA tests and work that way. That is something that some people I know have done. I have been able to do a certain test, but it's not revealed to me exactly what I wanted, so I still have more work to do on that area. I think reading around the topic, so reading the history of things that would have impacted your bloodline and your ancestry, is really, really helpful, and then unpacking things that pertain to you and that directly correlate with your experience or something that you find out about perhaps that's happened, and maybe exploring shadow work around those themes can be really supportive for you. And again, this is where you really craft your own practice. And I feel that a lot of the time people, I think, maybe want answers to things that they won't necessarily be able to get from anyone else. And they're not quite understanding that they're not going to be able to get that from anyone else because the answers are specific to them, and the only way they're going to find out the answers, and even sometimes the questions that they need to ask, they're only going to find those out by doing the work themselves. And so that's often the case. I feel like you have to just craft the practice and allow, then it's like each slab of the pavement kind of reveals itself to you as you're on the path. Do you know what I mean? Like Alice in Wonderland, she's on the path and it's just kind of like unfolding for her. It has to be a little bit more like that, I think. And so I really want to empower people to just forget about what they see, forget about what everyone else's practice looks like, because that's not what's important. What's important is your practice. So you might be working with a lot more unknown dead for you. You might be working with ancestors mostly that are not your blood ancestry because you don't know your lineage yet. And so that also might be a journey for you, and it's part and parcel of taking these steps in the right direction for you that pertains to your context and your situation and what works for you and what you're comfortable with. So it's so important to just understand what your limits are as well and what your boundaries are. And I think even just very beginner, right at the beginning, get your journal out and just journal. What do you want from this? Do you want to connect to people that you really, really loved who have now passed on? Do you want to understand who those people were who are in your bloodline that you don't know about yet? For me, those silhouettes in the dark that, you know, for me, I have a feeling, but I don't know their names. Like, do you want to know who those people are? Who do you want to connect with? Why? What is your motivation? And what do you want out of it? And I think just those questions can really help the ball roll. So then really the first connection, it depends on what we've just talked about, right? So depending on who they are and what connection you want with them, but always following that respect, that reciprocity, the boundaries, and then also the caution and being discerning. You always want to have a clean, protected space. Again, that protection work is so key. And then, like any other ritual, let it unfold in a beautiful, natural way for you. You know, whatever you do to create your space, whether you do cast a circle, whether you sit in meditation, whether you enter ritual space via the astral, however you do this, call in your ancestors in whatever way. And it may be that if you are doing this work on the astral space, for instance, if you live with others and the only thing you can do is have a little cupboard like I had when I was growing up, a little cupboard that was my altar space, and I got it out and, you know, lit a candle every other night, that was my altar space. You know, if that's it for you, you might be working the astral. And so maybe you're going into the astral space, you're doing all of that work first, and then you're setting out a campfire and they're appearing in front of you in that way, and that is your experience, and then you're journaling it afterwards, and you can have a specific journal connected to your ancestors that then becomes a living embodiment of your experiences on the astral, and that might be the way you work. You may have an ancestor altar and work with the tarot, and that is your practice, and you have different tarot spreads for connecting at different times. You may go on a big journey and actually invest in finding out who these people were, going through 23andMe or Ancestry.com and actually building up a pitch and being one of these people, these amazing people. I have a few of them on both sides of my family. I'm really grateful, and I've got some of their information, but some of them are building up a picture of who some of these people were like a few generations ago in our lives. That is really powerful as well. And so whatever works for you, but say if you're doing it in a space, you have your ancestor altar, you're doing it in a space, you're doing a very physical kind of in physical reality ritual, you may wish to cast a circle, you may wish to call the quarters, you may wish to simply cast an energetic circle, you may wish to do something like the LBRP, you know, whatever it is for you. You may wish to lay a compass round or tread the mill, for instance, you know, raise energy in that way, like whatever way works for you. It depends. I would definitely speak out loud your intentions and ask for those well-loving ancestors and beloved dead, those known and unknown ancestors of blood and spirit with the highest and greatest intentions for you, to come forward, to connect in with you, to meet with you, to get to know you, and to offer guidance and support, and to speak with you about the guidance and support that they also need as well. So what trauma, maybe you might receive downloads, as I have when I've been in astral space. I've received downloads about some of my own known dead, about some of the healing that needs to go on. It was about a maternal bloodline and some of the trauma that is involved in that. That was something that came through as a psychic download. It's not something that I have read about in any ancestor test, but something I know is there. This process can look in any different way, but as a general rule of thumb, you want to have a cleansed space, you want to prepare fully with all of the materials and items that you'll need, you'll want to protect yourself and your space, and you'll want to be respectful when you go in and when you call your ancestors in. You want to be respectful, you want to have your boundaries in place, and you want to be clear on what you want to get from it and what you're here to do in terms of cultivating a respectful and reciprocal relationship. Always offer thanks and always offer that respect, I think, and thanks to ancestors, whether they present as well or not. I just think it's respectful to do so. And even if you don't wish to work with an ancestor, just in the way that you would respect any spirit, I think it is important to be respectful. If you do make connections with dearly departed loved ones, beloved dead, it's quite likely that whatever you knew of them as a person is unfolding still as they pass on. And I have examples in my experience of, as I said, loved ones who have passed in peace, and also loved ones who have passed in less peace. Let's just put it like that. And I think, you know, there's a difference with the way that the experience unfolds. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but just keep your wits about you and know how to protect yourself and to be safe, because people are complicated. People are complicated beings. And, you know, I think that even with the best will in the world, with the best intentions, we can still unknowingly hurt people in life, and I believe in death also. So please be careful. So in terms of if you are walking this practice mostly with the cards or divination, you wish to connect in, you know, simple questions such as, you know, if there is an ancestor who wishes to connect to me, please show who you are, and questions that will lead you to unfold answers. You may also wish to connect to your ancestors with a spirit board, and that I think you might need a little bit more knowledge on a spirit board in particular, because they are a little bit more complicated than a tarot deck or an oracle deck, and they are sort of more connected and wrapped up with, you know, some more of that sort of cultural zeitgeist that I talked about before, that's sort of very much like connecting to spirits for fun, and there needs to be real respect when approaching a spirit board that I can't really talk about right here. So I mean, only if you know how to work with a spirit board and you connect with other spirits would I advise that you utilize the spirit board to connect with your ancestors, and in that case obviously cleansed and protected, very much protected before. And that's all I'm going to say about spirit boards, because it's a whole other video that would take me a lot of time to do. It's just the kind of the way it is at the moment. I've got a list of hundreds of videos I want to make, and it's just time and energy and motivation really, and what else is going on in life. I definitely think having an ancestor journal as well, and then you can also journal down any dreams, messages that come through, any astral work as I spoke about, all of that, and then also any trance work, journeying, any messages that come through at all, any experiences, smells, sensations, sights, those kinds of things, whatever. Even if something feels like an oppressive kind of heaviness, those kinds of things are important to note down, especially as you get to know who it is that you're connecting with. It may be that you are connecting to an element of a memory of theirs, or it may be that you're connecting to an element of hurt or trauma that they have experienced that you are now able to sort of help them to heal, which is again something I have experienced before, and I think it can be a really nourishing process if you are protected and if you are approaching it in the right way. Raising energy is an important thing. I think it would be good to do a video specifically on raising energy because it's quite a specific point in ritual space, and I think that energy work is a way that you are able to make offerings to your ancestors and also to commune with your ancestors and your beloved dead, and I think things like drums are really helpful for that, and any kind of binaural beats or like, you know, repetitive kind of music that you can even put on your iPhone or on your computer or through a speaker or something. Those kinds of things can be really, really helpful for going into a trance state, going into journey work. Also in terms of like getting yourself to wherever you are going to be meeting, whether that's at a fire pit or a woodland space or a garden that you used to go to or a particular house that you used to go to. If you're, you know, just at the beginning of that kind of journey, you may wish to simply walk into a tree, walk down a tree, walk up a tree. You may wish to find yourself walking through a forest. You may wish to envisage yourself lying on a forest floor as you are lying on your bed and then transition there. You may wish to lift upwards. You may wish to do any number of things. Sometimes it's helpful to imagine yourself floating in black space, floating up into the ethers and then going beyond there. Again, there are so many different ways that you can do this. Just listening to a few guided meditations, you'll have a number of different ways that you're able to do this. Oftentimes guided meditations will walk up steps, walk down steps, that kind of thing, into caves. Any liminal spaces like beaches, woodlands, these are great places where land, sea and sky meet, things like that. Think of any liminal spaces. You can use doorways, even places like train stations are great for this. Candles are really, really powerful. Working with herbs, if there are particular plant herbal allies that are ancestral for you, these will become known to you in your awareness, or they may already be. For instance, for me, my paternal grandmother, roses and apples, those are big, big, big for my connection with my grandma, and there are other herbal allies as well. There are just a number of plant spirit allies you can connect in, and you can foster that connection, cultivate that connection with the plant spirit when you're just communing with the plant spirit in itself, and that connection will deepen then your connection with your ancestor. There's a number of other ways in which you can work with ancestors that would involve other techniques such as script writing for meeting an ancestor, or script writing for rewriting a particular argument perhaps that you would like to then convey a message to a loved one that you weren't able to before they passed away for whatever reason. Writing letters as well and burning them to release them to the fires can be really powerful, and then meeting ancestral spirits at the fire can be really, really powerful. I mean, that fire, it burns bright through our DNA and through our lineage, and I think it's because it connects us back to what it means to be a human and to that kind of innate survival instinct. You can always call on ancestors for protection and for guidance and for support, and I have done this a lot with certain real life problems and issues and situations. I have done this a lot, and it's very, very helpful, and oftentimes you'll get an answer that you know is not you because it's not come from your head, it's not come from your mind, but the comfort in receiving those messages. And sometimes if you have clairaudience, you may be able to hear the voice, the particular sound of that person's voice, especially in the hypnagogic states. That is something that comes through very strongly, something on the astral that you may also receive, and it can be so poignant and special and supportive and healing as well. And so reaching out with thanks and prayer, it can be such a profound, beautiful thing. I've also spoke to people who have tattoos for their loved ones, and multiple members of the family have the same tattoo that the loved one had, or it's a tattoo of something that is symbolically representative of their relationship and their connection, and it transcends in a way that is just really, really beautiful, that you wouldn't expect something as superficial as a tattoo to do, but there's something so very magical and potent and powerful about it. there's many ways that you can recognize that connection is being made, and you know, there may be some form of confirmation bias in this as well. So again, it's the similar signs and synchronicities that you would look for, as discussed it with many of these witchy spiritual topics with connecting with spirits and such. And I just think discernment is probably the most important piece, and being critical of whatever it is, and so not taking everything as a sign, but just being aware and noting down anything, and then spotting patterns really is a great way to go. In terms of best practice, it's really important to be ethical and mindful of the land that you're on, and definitely speaking about certain injustices that occurred through your bloodline can be really important and powerful, and acknowledging the fault of your ancestors as well can be really powerful and important to do. As I said, I think it's really, really important again to be mindful of indigenous practices and the land that you're on, and acknowledging the land as well that you're on. Like, I would always advocate that if you're outdoors, that you acknowledge the land and the people of the land that you are on, and also that you ask for permission to do any workings there. If you're in your own home and you have your protections on, you don't necessarily have to do that, but I would like to think that in connecting to the home that you live in, that is on the land, that has already been an inherent part of your practice, getting to know your home and the land that it resides within really. So for me, for instance, this is a new build, so the land was farming land, and so when we moved in I was very conscious of the fact that, you know, this has never been built on before. In many ways there are plant and animal spirits that we are taking their habitat away, and so giving back to that habitat in the garden and then the land that I'm on, and being reverential whenever I'm in the space. So it's not exactly the same as for many I know who live, say, in America. It's slightly different, but just being aware and always acknowledging the land and asking for permission is just a great rule of thumb, and being aware of consent as well when working with spirits. Always be mindful, again, if you're working outdoors, not to pour libations or salt or anything directly on the land. You know, things like water, that's okay, but always just leave it as you found it, or ideally better than how you found it. And just be mindful not to leave sweet treats like chocolate or anything that could be harmful for the wildlife or whatever is residing there. You know, try not to disturb habitats. Things like leaves, like the leaves fall at this time of year, and often you have lots and lots of beautiful leaves. Leaf blowing and raking leaves, it's just not a good thing to do. It destroys those habitats. I don't really want to go too much into correspondences and such, but I'm sure you probably have a correspondence book like Scott Cunningham's Magical Book of Herbs. You know, there are herbs that you can connect with your ancestral spirits if you don't have any known sort of spiritual plant allies, like I mentioned, like rose or apple. I mean, things like mugwort are great to connect in. Tobacco, I had a grandparent who used tobacco frequently, and so those are very, very good for connecting in, I think, as well. Herbs like rosemary, it's a very beautiful herb to work with, and anything else as well that you remember consuming with your family when you were young. So for instance, if you had a grandparent that always put cress in your egg sandwiches, there's a correspondence right there. Someone who garnished with parsley, you know, or if you had a family member who used to garden and they used to grow spring onions or something, I don't know, you've got a correspondence there. So really think about what you remember of the person. And then offerings we've talked about. There are obviously meditations and visualizations you can do. I particularly love the fire as the central focus of a meditation, and especially when you're meeting with ancestors or communing around the fire, you could have a sort of lineage or a circlet or a spiral of ancestors that present to you. I've also seen in dream space a line of ancestors that were shrouded, you know, silhouetted. So there are a number of techniques and meditations that you can practice with these ancestors to know them better, to know them deeper. You can also go in via your body. I connect into my womb space to connect in with my maternal ancestral line. I also feel a connection with my paternal grandmother when I connect in with my womb space. And I know it's not a direct connection in that I ever lived in her womb, but in a way I did. So it's not exactly the same, but I still feel that connection there. I feel like you don't have to possess any particular body part in order to do that. I think if I didn't have a womb, I would still feel connected with that maternal bloodline, and I would still feel connected with my paternal bloodline as well. So just me mentioning that and my experience. It's an experiential mention. It is not to say that someone who doesn't have a womb or does have a womb can necessarily do this or not do this. It's something that's just an experience of mine that I've had, and I would very much advocate that anyone can go in through the body and connect in to their bloodline through their own body and through meditating in particular areas of the body. I don't know if you've ever meditated with your heart space before, or meditated with any of your chakras or any of your cauldrons, for instance with the cauldron of Posey. If you've ever done any of those meditations, that kind of thing can be really, really powerful for then connecting you in with your lineage as well, particularly bloodline. In terms of books, I have 2 books that I would highly recommend, and then there are some other books that I've not read but I've heard are good. One of them is What Remembered Lives by Phoenix LaFay. I've not read that book, but I've heard it is good. A book that I would highly advocate you read if you are new to this practice is Mallory Vaudois' Honouring Your Ancestors. It is here. So this is a book I greatly enjoyed. It's quite a small book. It's very accessible, very easy to read. There are some beautiful practices in here, and I think it's just a fantastic place to start if you are new to this. So this is Honouring Your Ancestors, A Guide to Ancestral Veneration. It's one I read a number of years ago now, but it's something that I would definitely go back to. So it's a Llewellyn book, so it's very easy to access certain areas. So if you wanted to make some notes in it, you know, everything's sectioned out. You'll be able to find things very easily in here, and I think this is a fantastic place to start. Anything that is connecting you with your culture or your lineage in terms of history, in terms of country of origin, in terms of your own personal ancestry would be really, really powerful. And I think especially if you came from a particular tradition, so you're learning the tradition of your ancestors, I think that could be really powerful. So anything about that specifically, if you had a parent who was specifically involved in a particular tradition, that would be a great place to start as well. I'm sure that you're already on that if that is the case for you. A book to deepen into your practice is Ancestral Medicine, Rituals for Personal and Family Healing by Daniel For, PhD. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. There are some amazing practices and a lot of insight is given. Again, there's a lot of reverence held for ancestors of place, as well as understanding that, you know, forgiveness and troubled members of your ancestry is going to be something that you probably encounter, and understanding how to navigate that kind of relationship, or understanding how to navigate that kind of trauma. The emphasis here is on healing for yourself and for family members, so it does hit on some of those aspects, but all whilst being incredibly respectful to the land you're on and respectful to the spirits that you may encounter, as well as the spirits whom your ancestors may have harmed. So there is a great reference there in this book. I would highly recommend. And then this is a book that I've been sent by Llewellyn very recently. This is Psychopomps and the Soul, Traversing Death and Life for Healing and Wholeness, A Mother's Journey to Reclaim Life's Wonder After Loss by Tiffany Lasik. Now, I've read a book by Tiffany Lasik before, The Noble Art, and there's a Wheel of the Year book as well that goes with The Noble Art. Now this is their latest book, and I've not read this yet. I'm very much looking forward to it. This is slightly different. This is looking at psychopomps, and Tiffany Lasik is a psychotherapist as well. So it is tapping into ancient wisdom to ease modern distress around grief and inner darkness. There are topics in here such as visitation dreams, which is something I've experienced within my ancestral practice. And so there are areas that may support you with your ancestral practice as well. Again, as I said, I've not read this one yet, so it's not a full review, but I hope to be reading it. It looks fantastic, so I would recommend this if you are interested in other sort of aspects of this death work. So we've come to the end. You know, there is so much more to talk about here. There's so many other contextual specifics that I could not know that would maybe pertain to you or one of your loved ones. This is your path. This is your journey. You make it yours. So here's a blank space, and it is yours to go and fill. And, you know, I would be happy to answer or try to answer any questions that you might have. Again, like, I am not the be all and end all. I'm not, you know, an oracle of knowledge. I am just one person who is bumbling their way through life and their practice. And these are some of the findings and knowledge and wisdom that I have learnt and accrued along the way during practice. And so I hope that this as an offering is something that will support you and your loved ones and your beloved dead and your known and unknown ancestors of blood and soul and spirit as you go forth, cultivate and craft your path and your journey the way it is meant to be for you. So with all that said, I hope that you enjoyed it. Please leave me any questions or comments below. I'd love to hear how you're practicing at this time of year. Many, many blessings for Samhain and spooky season. May you enjoy the season of the dead and really embrace what that means for you. Really do some deep diving shadow work. Just soak into the deliciousness of the season. I'm sending you so much love. Drop me a like, heart, comment, share, subscribe, hype the video if you will, and yeah, I would love to hear from you in the comments box if you've got any questions or comments or thoughts, and let me know what you're up to. I have all my links below: Instagram, old TikTok page, Patreon, buy me a coffee, Ko-fi, etc. Super thanks. Being here is amazing though. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak on the things that mean so much to me. I'm sending you so much love and so many blessings and well wishes for this season. Stay well and look after yourselves, and I look forward to seeing you in another video really soon. Take care, many blessings. Mwah. Bye.